right. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Before we get started, we'll just go over a few logistic notes. Just so you know, everyone will be in listen-only mode. We will have the Q&A session at 15 minutes at the end of the presentation, but feel free at any time throughout this webinar to put in your questions into the chat field, and I will take a look at those as we allow for that opportunity to learn and share from each other. In addition, we will have a couple polls today, so you'll get to be able to provide some feedback on some interesting questions that we'd like to probe and make sure that we're all thinking on this topic in a new light. As well as this webinar is being recorded, and we will be emailing you the webinar recording after this session, likely tomorrow probably at the latest. All right, so we will get started. Okay, so my name is Denise Webster. I have recently joined SCS Global Services as VP of Food Safety, responsibility for the training, certification, and all things food safety. I come from consulting, and so many of you might know me from consulting and doing training that you have joined me in the past. And so I appreciate you coming on this webinar and continuing our path. And for those of you that are new for my webinars, I hope you enjoy our style and approach of being able to offer you guys some intriguing information beyond just your standard webinar. Just a little quick background about SCS Global, especially if you're new to SCS webinars and services. We are an international leader, third-party food safety, environmental and sustainable certification, as well as a standards development. We specialize in all things from the auditing to life cycle assessment and strategic consulting. In the Food and Ag division, which I'm under, we have a wide range of services, also from training, consulting, and certification against the GFSI schemes, but also product-specific claims such as our new plant-based seal and sustainable agricultural programs. In this new role, I'm learning so much of the offerings around sustainable agriculture, and even SCS Global Services has carbon neutral certification and social compliance. So today's topic, as you guys all know, is crisis management and food defense. I always like to just kind of start with my perspective before we dive in. You know, as a trainer and consultant in the industry and having to ensure that I'm helping clients to not only understand, but to implement crisis management and food defense plans against BRC and SQF and many of those other schemes. You know, I struggled too with being able to determine, how do I really test this? How do I develop a plan in the first place? You know, it's kind of hard to think of creative ideas, approaches. How do we ensure that we are all getting at the ultimate goal, which is to take a second, step back and ask, why are these audit standards asking us to do this in the first place, right? Every clause in these schemes are purposeful, they're deliberate. The intention is to protect the food and that we have a plan and that plan will work in the event of a crisis or a food defense issue. So taking that perspective, I will be covering some key topics today, which is how to look at it from a risk assessment standpoint. What's the importance of having a plan that really works, to also develop strategies that you can prepare before and after a crisis occurs. We'll then pivot over into food defense and just remind everybody about what it is and the key requirements. Look at some of the resources and tools that we have available out there, and ultimately how we can improve our food defense and become a more risk-aware food business. And as I mentioned, we will spend some time after the end of this webinar answering your Q&A. Please ask me anything that you have, and hopefully I'll be able to answer it. And if we can't get through all the questions, we can always follow up afterwards. All right, so we're gonna start off with a poll. So let me launch the poll here. Okay. There we go. All right, so how robust is your crisis management incident plan? So, I'll give you guys a few, seconds to think about this, right? Is it excellent? Do you have detailed risk assessments and plans and you feel pretty confident in them? Maybe they're good, you've started, you've got the basics, you've got a plan in place, but you're still maybe a little unsure where you can improve, or we might be, just starting out, or definitively this is where you need to put some more effort into this coming audit cycle. And maybe you don't have a plan or you're unsure. I gave you that as an option. So I'll just give you guys a few more seconds, think about this, answer this question, and then I'll share with you guys the results. All right, looks like you guys have all had an opportunity, so I'm going to close the poll. Okay. All right, so this looks like that beautiful histogram chart where we've got 62% say it's good. You've got a good foundation for those risk assessments and mitigation plans. And then that's flanked with 13% of you feel that your plans are excellent. Great. Well, especially too at the end of the Q&A, if you guys have any advice for others out there, any ideas that you've done that's worked successfully, we would love to hear from you guys in not just a Q&A standpoint, but a sharing opportunity. And then 19% of you are in the needs improvement. And honestly, that's where, a good portion of the clients that I come and visit, they do need assistance. And that's why I'm hoping this webinar will really help you guys get into the good, and our good can get into that excellent. And maybe even we'll provide a few thought bubbles for those of you that ranked your site as excellent. All right. So as a reminder, right, this does have a requirement under the GFSI standards, whether you're SQF, BRC, or Primus GFS. Our goal here is that not only we're complying with our GFSI requirements, but that we're putting programs together that are a fit for our business. It's site specific. And you'll see as we go through this webinar, that's really the angle that we're going to take. It's not something generic that is going to be applied across different types of businesses. Think of it like a HACCP plan. A HACCP plan at a bakery is going to look very different than a HACCP plan at a sauce company or a ready meal company. Very much the same with our crisis management and food defense plan. These are specific. And that goes with our challenges and how we challenge these plans to achieve compliance. And I'll offer you guys up some ideas in order to be able to better and more effectively think about how to approach those challenges or test in whichever capacity you view it. It's also good to note there are guidance documents. So if you're SQF or BRC, they have guidance documents. They have additional training, some of the trainings that we have in our portfolio for risk assessment management. And just overall think about this from two other angles. Continuous improvement, right? So we always can improve our plans, no matter how robust they are. And have we considered the food safety culture component when we're looking at our crisis management and food defense plan, as they all connect together, right? These are not siloed schemes, they're not siloed clauses. These are all working together as a well-oiled machine in order to protect the product, the food, the facility, and ultimately the consumer. So let's start off with crisis. Just close some stuff down here. So potential crisis, they really do come in all shapes and sizes. We can think about them as a disruption of key business services, natural disasters, unexpected events that can impact our ability to deliver safe and quality products. We also must identify the people component, of course, right? In a crisis, we have to ensure employee safety, but are we effectively looking at these crises from a product angle? And how effective are they in identifying what would happen to the product in the event of this? And what do we need to do in terms of the mitigation plans to help significantly minimize their impact? And that's why one of the teasers was, this is not a fire drill, right? Testing your crisis management plan, having a fire drill might be one in 10 other things that you're doing in order to test that unexpected event of a fire. And it does look at the people, but from a GFSI perspective, right, when we're looking at our audit schemes, we have to make sure that we're focusing on what would happen in the event of a flood for the impact of water or a natural disaster. Or when we look at the ability to maybe our employees to properly get to the site and be able to produce product. We might not be able to get product out the door due to employee impacted events. And of course, we have supply chain challenges and more to factor. So that's a lot of different potential crises. So how do we take all this and put it into a meaningful step-by-step way for us to be able to get the end result of what we're looking for, which is to protect product and mitigate these issues? So I came up with for you guys an 8-step plan, and we'll take a look at these as we kind of go through. So first, we need to establish and train that crisis management team, and we'll talk through some of these more. We need to obtain senior management commitment to support that crisis management plan and the resources. Third bucket, which we'll spend the most time on, which is, or third and fourth, which is to identify the potential crisis that could impact your facility, product, and people. Then select a risk assessment tool to assist. There's many different risk assessment tools out there that we use in the industry. Unfortunately, this is an area we're not really standardized on. So I'm going to share with you guys 2 examples that you might find helpful. Not only do we then have to get that team together, agree the tool, make sure we're knowledgeable about crisis, but then we have to conduct it and document the rationale. Then from that work, we have to develop the mitigation plan based on the level of risk or based on the impact that it could have on our product. Lastly, we then can't just have that plan in place sitting on a shelf. We need to make sure everyone's prepared. So we need to communicate the mitigation plans and develop the foundations in order to be able to know what to do in the event of. And lastly, while you're all here, how do we challenge it? How do we test these plans? How do we ensure an effectiveness? So I'll give you guys some ideas on that. So let's take a look at starting by creating a classification. And this is, again, these are all recommendations from my years of experience and working with hundreds of factories doing these plans. So this is just an approach that you can take. So classification, so you can break them out into known threats, historical, or unknown/new threats. This classification helps in order to kind of bucket those different crises. So a known threat are those that could occur based on our specific facility and company. We maybe have a very automated process line, so we know that if we lost electricity, it would impact production. We would have product that would potentially be damaged in the event of, if it was in, a big continuous conveyor belt oven. Right, so we have known threats also just on our location as well. Where do we live in the world, right? Where is our site located? Is it susceptible to earthquake, fire, flood, windstorm events? So we really have to just take a look at our own known threats and history as well. Have we had any of these crises in the past? Could it happen again? Do we have a mitigation plan that worked or didn't work, right? So in order to eliminate, reduce, or maybe we need to improve our actions next time. Maybe the loss of power is something that is an issue that has occurred. So maybe that mitigation plan is that you don't just have a company to get electric generator, but maybe you purchase one, right? These are all different things that we can talk about in the mitigation plan. by understanding the classification of where they started from in the first place. And then, of course, lastly, the unknown threats. I can definitively tell you many of the programs did not have pandemic in it, right? It wasn't known or a historical threat. So there are things out there that we're just not going to have a plan for. So that crisis management team, we have to do a little brainstorming, thinking outside of the box. What are we missing? What might be significant that we need to prepare or create at least a foundation of protocols on how to tackle unknown or new threats? So here is one of the first risk assessments that I'm going to share with you guys. We're just going to take a look at it from the natural kind of disaster, Mother Nature perspective, because the slide's limited, but you can use this for all of the different crises that we just talked about. So if you see here all the typical types of events, you can then create an impact assessment score. This is, where 1 would be marginal or 0 would be no, there's no risk. 1 would be marginal risk, 2 would be moderate and recoverable, 3, it would be significant and be a critical impact to your business, and 4, it could be catastrophic. Again, not one person can make this classification and prioritization. This has to be that crisis management team. You have to take a look at those known location, what's happened in the past, and what potentially could happen given, the things that are occurring. I mean, we just had flooding, in New York last week, and I have many clients in New York that experienced some issues in their facilities. So those are types of things that we have to look at. So what do? Once you guys agree to the impact assessment, and you can use this approach, then you look at it through a couple different buckets: people, product, facility, and operation. Those are the 3 that I'm proposing. You could add another one as well. And then you total up that score. The score is really only to prioritize. So if we take a look here, you can see that fire scored the highest of a 9, whereas earthquake, so this facility is likely here where I'm in California, right? We have fire and earthquake, right? This is definitely 2 that I would have in any of my California food crisis plans. And rain and flood. This, you may be up on a hill area where flooding is not an issue, or you might be in a basin or a desert area where the likelihood of flood getting into your operation is higher. So you can see that taking into account using this scoring approach can help you risk prioritize. So now I know I'm not going to try to create a crisis management plan for every natural disaster that's out there. We're going to create a crisis management plan that's focused on those that are the highest risk, those that will have the biggest impact, so we can make sure we put robust plans in place and prepare the team for those events. The second type of risk assessment is our likelihood and severity chart. Many of you will know that this looks very familiar because this is taken a page from our food safety and hazard plan risk assessments, although we changed the consequence and severity. Here we put negligible to catastrophic. Normally in our hazard plans, we have, if it's going to cause an illness, injury, if it's going to have a recall impact. So taking a page and just putting it in a different lens can help us address and further prioritize, or use this to prioritize, to compare the likelihood of that event happening, that flood, fire, earthquake, versus what's the consequence, right? Is our building wood? Is it stable? Is our building made of, very strong cement that already has earthquake prevention built in, right? So it's very site specific. You have to ask yourself many different factors to determine the likelihood and the consequence. Here, just like in that other risk assessment, we need to know what to do with this information. And I gave you guys about a few different approaches. You can use a color code system. You can use a number, you can use both to essentially determine the level of risk. And if you get a level of risk that is 16 to 25, then that means you need to have detailed mitigation plans in place with resources as well as ways to reduce the risk. So we can't just say, well, it's a high risk, we're going to put mitigation plans in place. We've got to find our ways around it. We've got to maybe, shore up some issues that we have. Likely, you might find that a risk is a 9 to 15. That's also an approach where you need, as an outcome, you need to have detailed mitigation plans in place, multiple steps. You might also further need to invest in resources like that backup generator or structural design. And you need to make sure it's tested and ready to go. So in 16 to 25, we want to try to reduce it down to a 9 to 15 in order to be able to have a better outcome-based measurement. If it's in the yellow or green here, or those lower numbers, then we can have more event-specific or basic mitigation foundational things in place. Obviously, we can take a look at this in a few different lights. So let's take our crisis incident of that civil unrest, or you can see it's unlikely and it's a moderate. So we have that low risk, and sorry, there's an extra line there. And we have that low risk ultimately means that although it could happen, right? We're not going to put a lot of work to the civil unrest issue. But if we look at our fire or flood, we're a little higher. And so we're going to put more effort. These are the ones that we're going to test. And then as we continuously improve, we can roll out more programs, more challenges. Computer outage. This is one we should all have on our crisis management plan, right? That could mean we don't have access to our data management systems. It might even be a high risk for some facilities because they have all computerized systems that run their operation, that even might pump in a additive into the line. So there could be a lot of different computer outage issues that could impact the safety of the product, depending on the complexity of technology in your operation. So it could be from low to very high, depending on your site. And ultimately that risk output is going to have some planning options, right? We need that for that power outage, that backup generator, emergency contact. We need a procedure for the main power shutoff line, and we need line clearance protocols. So, right, so if we look at it, what are we doing to prepare for this? For our computer outage, we need a backup plan. Do we need IT service providers? Do we have IT service providers listed on our crisis management contact list? So it's many different components to challenge and test a plan. We're asking questions, we're diving deeper, we're looking at, do we have the things in place in order to ensure that we can mitigate this risk? And ultimately, we don't forget the impact assessment has to be product specific as well. How do we identify product? How do we disposition it for safety and quality? That must be part of all of our plans. Okay, so here's just some helpful best practices based on those 8 steps that we covered earlier. The senior management is responsible for decision-making, oversight, and initiating those actions arising from crisis management incidents, right? So senior management needs to be aware of the importance of our crisis management plan. They need to sign off on that team, right? And who's going to be on that team. And this might look a little different than your food safety team. This, if you have an IT professional on your team, I would say that they would be on that core team. Maintenance, of course. You might also consider, who would need to take action in the event. It'd be good to have someone of that nature, even externally on that team as appropriate. Then we need to communicate the key steps in the plan to the team and ensure awareness and risk preparedness is in place. Also our controls for ensuring product, and of course people safety, right? This is a crisis, so we're having to look at it from two different perspectives. That contact list. So whenever we challenge our plan, definitely make sure on that list is going through that contact list. It's likely one or more contacts are not up to date. Maybe you changed service providers. Maybe you're missing a critical contact. Maybe the phone number, email is incorrect. You know, you can always send an email or get on the phone and just test it. Hey, I'm just, calling to test our crisis management plan. All of this is part of our challenge and our test. So it's not running a fire drill. It's not just participating in Earthquake Awareness Month, right? Those are components of it. But we really need to dig deeper to really meet the requirements and expectations of our GFSI requirements. So some additional steps, right, on challenging the plan. Test those high-risk crises. That's why we spent our time developing that risk assessment and prioritizing, so we could identify those crises that are highest risk. Also, if you test it and things are great, then move on, rotate, pick a different crisis that next year. If you identify some issues, then make sure you're testing it again, but then test another one. I know it says we only need to do one challenge a year, but my challenge to you guys is, would you really want to only test one thing, right? So make sure that we're rotating and we're rechecking those things that we identified maybe were not as robust as they could be. You're going to develop a mock scenario that is realistic, and it involves a cross-functional team. How is it realistic? Well, it's because you're going to create kind of that checklist of those things that you need to test, which is the contacts. You might want to conduct interviews. Do they know what to do? You're going to also ensure that you have the ability to execute your mitigation plan. So you're testing the mitigation plan, right? We're coming up with scenarios that are realistic against what we said we would do in the event of. Also, you can consider both announced and unannounced challenges. When we do unannounced challenges, we just want to always make sure we're considering people's safety in the event of, or if product inadvertently gets affected during an unannounced challenge, whatever that might look like, just proceed with caution on that. But maybe start with announced and then go from there. And as I mentioned, create that checklist, observations and interviews, your contact list, and if you didn't document, it didn't happen. So conduct a thorough document of not just the post-crisis assessment, right? What was the outcome, but document the date you did it, the times, who was involved, what was the scenario, what was the outcomes. And it's okay if we find some things that need fixing. Document that, bring the crisis management team together, make those change management updates, such as the mitigation plan, and retest where appropriate. And then, of course, that requirement is to review all of our programs, including our crisis plan, at least annually. So that's that SOP, and perhaps double checking your risk assessment is still up to date. Okay, so here is just an example, a very simplistic example, but in case you guys are, I like pictures, so this kind of helps me see it in real life. We've got the date, the scope, the event, the activities we conducted, what were the outcomes, what were the areas of opportunity for improvement. Maybe you have the crisis management team sign off on this, or we've got that normal verification sign off of conducted and verified by. In terms of what we got here to the right, you guys will all get, this training afterwards, so we can see here a little detail about how we managed the electrical outage challenge activity and what we did. We'll also look at the training, look at our records of our product. And don't forget, if you actually have a real life crisis, that does count as well as a crisis challenge. So document it. If you do end up having a power outage or some sort of event, then put that pen and paper and get that documented and follow all those steps of what was the outcome, right? What happened? What did we need to work on? What did we need to improve? And what went well? All right, so that's all we have for crisis management. So now we're going to pivot to food defense. So let me just open up our next poll here. Okay, how likely do you think a food defense event could happen in your business? Okay, so remember food defense. Now, if we shift gears and think about this is where, you know, someone wants to cause a wide-scale public health harm. They want to contaminate your food supply chain stream, right? They want to create something that could cause illness or injury. Okay, I'll give you guys 30 more seconds or so to take a look and answer our poll. All right, got critical mass here, so I will close the poll here. Okay. So it looks like 59% of you thought it was unlikely that plans are in place and monitored, which is great. It's a good foundation, but we still have 21% that feel, yeah, it's likely. Plans are in place, but maybe not as monitored as effectively. And this is, as you know, these numbers indicate, we definitely do need to improve this area. This is something everyone should have on their to-do list for this new year. How do we strengthen our food defense plans? We have 15% of very unlikely. So, you know, we've got a good foundation there too of plans that are in place, and or, you know, our business perhaps, you know, doesn't have that continuous flow of product or big vats of sauce or something where it could actually be easy for someone to infiltrate our food stream. Okay. Let me just close that down. All right. So a reminder in terms of what is required for our food defense plan. So here we're going to look at regulations. So for those of you that join this webinar that are FDA facilities, we do all have to comply now with the intentional adulteration vulnerability assessment rule, right? Our IAVA rule. We have to make sure that we have mitigation plans in place, as well as FDA has noted that they will at some point start initiating quick check audits. This is where, much like what they did with preventive controls, where they're going to go out and see if our food facilities are indeed putting food defense plans in place. So I'll cover some basics in this webinar, but this is an area where we do need to kind of improve our knowledge and training on in what FDA expects in order to prepare for these potential quick check audits. This also applies to both domestic and foreign facilities. So any foreign facility that is selling product or importing product here into the US and it's FDA, they also have to have a food defense plan. And FDA has some great tools, which I'll share with you guys in just a few minutes. For those of you that are USDA or maybe dual jurisdiction facilities, this is still voluntary. Although USDA has always had kind of a food defense checklist inspection approach, but they have updated it to kind of be in line with FDA's thinking, which is around protecting critical infrastructure against insider threats, or what FDA calls the inside attacker. Right? We're not just looking at that our doors are locked, that we're not allowing, you know, people to key card anybody in, or if there's a visitor roaming around. That's still important that we protect that, but now we have to dig deeper. We have to look at those individuals that have legitimate access to our operation, that are handling, storing, preparing the food products on a daily basis in our operation. So we have to look at those inside threats. The USDA has also provided tools and guidance on their website. If you haven't been to that, please check out their website as well. And then lastly, our GFSI component. We are all required to conduct that threat assessment to determine what are those potential food defense threats through what FDA calls a vulnerability assessment. Those two words really are used interchangeably. Their goal is to identify that significant risk, document a mitigation plan, have effective systems in place, challenge or test that plan, and ensure we're conducting training. So very much the same stepwise process as the crisis management plan, but with a different angle, right? Here we're looking at protecting the food from people. So with the FDA's intentional adulteration rule, they have new terms and new requirements. One is having a view of identifying where in your operation you have significant vulnerabilities or that susceptibility point, step, or procedure that could reasonably likely to cause a wide-scale public health harm. And this is very much where someone could have access to many servings of product that could then get out into commerce and cause essentially significant illness or death in our population. We can do that through conducting our vulnerability assessment. We're going to look at the public health impact, the degree of physical access to the product, and the ability of the attacker to be successful. And this is all covered in the IAVA training. And if you haven't had an opportunity to become a qualified individual, I would encourage you to definitely sign up. This is a person who has education, training, or experience thereof necessary to perform that threat assessment or vulnerability assessment. And you do get a pretty certificate like this here, the FSPCA. So just like our preventive control. So just being a preventive control qualified individual does not qualify for you to be a food defense qualified individual, just to make sure that's very clear. So that rule also requires you to identify in your operation actionable process steps. Think about these as CCPs almost. It's a point step in the procedure where food could be impacted. But instead of a CCP, an APS is a significant vulnerability where someone could infiltrate, could contaminate the product stream. And we have to absolutely, in our plans, consider both the FDA, USDA, and to meet GFSI compliance, we have to comply with our regulations. So we all have to have in our plan that inside attacker, someone who has the basic understanding of our facility operation because they have legitimate access and they're around food, they can acquire or deploy a contaminant with the intent to cause wide-scale public health harm. There's different ways to approach this. FDA has what they call the key activity points. They have 3 elements and a hybrid, which is the approach I really like to use. And if you're, not knowing the difference between those 3, again, kind of that training is important. But this gives you at least a flavor for it in this webinar and that importance of why we need to put food defense plan on the top of our list of to-dos. Here is just a list of the FDA's intentional adulteration rule components. As you can see, it's pretty well aligned with our GFSI requirements. It's exactly what they're looking for, but from a regulatory perspective. So, we can combine both our regulatory requirements and what's expected from our GFSI schemes to be able to ensure we're effectively implementing against them. Ultimately, we do have to come out of this with mitigation strategies, ways to significantly reduce those points or those actionable process steps that we determined were a significant vulnerability. You might have mitigation strategies for things that aren't significant, but from a regulatory perspective, you're only looking at those that are significant in your mitigation strategy from a standpoint of ensuring that it is going to protect the food at that specific point, step, or procedure. The FDA has done a great job in providing us as an industry user-friendly tools and resources They have a downloadable food defense plan, but you can't really use that effectively unless you have the knowledge of the difference between a CAT and a 3-element. They also, once you've determined the significance, they have a food defense mitigation strategies database. You know, here on the left side, you can see it. You can pick, okay, I have conveyance or storage. You can type in a keyword, and then it lists all these different options that you could choose to deploy for mitigation strategies. So this really helps your food defense team be able to think outside of, you know, the normal things like a camera in the area, or, you know, they recommend buddy systems, for example, making sure that area where you have a significant vulnerability, that not just one person can be in that area with that product at a given time, that you have different approaches, that you train everyone on suspicious activity of their peers, see something, say something as part of those programs. Okay. So some of the questions that you might get asked if the FDA does come knocking at your door asking to see your food defense plan, they will want to see the written food defense plan. They will ask you, who is your food defense qualified individual? And you'll have to provide either that pretty certificate or proof that you have the knowledge on how to conduct a threat assessment. And further from that, they may ask you to show them the vulnerability threat assessment. What were the risks that you identified through that, the significant vulnerabilities? What approach did you take? And how, or did you consider the threat of that inside attacker? Are there mitigation plans in place? And have you reanalyzed that plan to ensure that if you had any findings or changes that you've documented and adjusted it? And this, of course, is just some thoughts, but right now I can tell you, you know, I've looked, I've asked, FDA is not out there actively enforcing this yet, so this is a great opportunity for us to get ahead of the curve. And we can do that by following our GFSI compliance as well to challenge our plans. We, just like our crisis plan, we want to identify those areas that determine significant risk. We want to conduct, you know, real world scenarios in terms of how do we look for suspicious activity? Maybe we can try to attempt to infiltrate or disrupt an area to see if anybody would say anything. Would we have, do we have areas where it's unsupervised, where product is exposed? Maybe our security, we can check our cameras. Maybe our cameras, you can hide, you know, in a certain area, and you could potentially put a product or a contaminant, arsenic or something of that nature that's very small, but have a big impact on consumer safety. So we want to look at where our cameras situated. Is there, you know, areas people are unsupervised or we can't see? Uncontrolled chemicals. We still want to include site security, so it is something that we still, you know, challenge. And then after hours and all shifts, or even changing shifts, shift changes. There's usually a lot more activity because you've doubled your size potentially during that shift change. So I know many of us, you know, have come up with some ideas about I've heard of placing a box with the word bomb written on it. One time I took a blue, like just blue water, colorized it and put it in a jug in the middle of warehouse, and, you know, things of that nature. We can take these funny approaches, but it's not realistic, right? And it's not it's not necessarily really doing it. We have to test the see something, say something. And this is through my own eyes, looking back at some of the ways that I even tried to challenge it and said, maybe I'm not getting the point of what we're really trying to do, right? We do need employees to be aware and look out for suspicious activity. Yes, unauthorized access, lack of personnel in the area, and of course, any of those types of areas where we might have a significant risk that you identified in your threat assessment. So the takeaways here, just measurements of success for both the crisis management and the food defense plan, is to make sure you have that team in place that's trained and knowledgeable. You have internal and external resources at your ability to ensure that you're doing the right risk assessments or vulnerability assessments and mitigation strategies. Food safety culture and values, right? That's not compromised during these events, that we're making the right food safety decisions, that we know what to do, and that we're protecting product, throwing away product where we have to. And that employees are risk aware. When we start having employees be the ones that are responsive and supporting this process and risk aware, that also impacts improvement in our food safety culture. And then just finding ways where we can minimize disruption of services to our facility, customers, consumers, strengthen the knowledge of risk, and increasing our procedures and our ability to react and put plans in motion, and just have that continuous improvement mindset and plan. All right, so let me open up the chat field here and see what questions we have coming in. Okay, so go ahead and feel free to put those questions in the chat field. Let's see here. Oh, it's up here. Okay. Okay, so where can I find the list that shows the mitigation strategies page? So if you, the list. So I think you'll get the copy of this slideshow, but at the FDA's website, if you just put in your Google search FDA mitigation food defense, you'll find all the different links, and it'll take you to that mitigation strategy outcome. I guess it's like a kind of open forum, platform where you're able to put in the different types of areas and processes, and it'll spit out some ideas for mitigation. Okay, and if there's something more specific that you had, just let me know. All right, let me see here. Sorry, let me just figure out how to use this. Okay, here I see one coming in. Let me undock it so I can maybe see the questions better. There we go. Okay, sorry. New at using the question box here. Okay. Yes, and same with those guidance documents. Those are, if you go to FDA website, USDA, they all have those guidance documents. And if you're looking for like SQF or BRC guidance documents, those are actually on their website too. So for BRC, right, it's through your Participate, which is the new LGC. If it's SQF, you go to sqfi.com, go to resources, and then the guidance documents are there. But please feel free to reach out if you can't find them. Okay, how many times annually do we need to do the risk assessment? So you do it initially, right, when you're launching it, and then yes, annually you reassess, or just like our food safety plan, whenever there's an event or something that changes, pull it back out and check to make sure that you have the appropriate risk assessment in place, which then drives that mitigation strategy. So definitely at minimum annually. So kind of follow the same food safety asset plan approach that we would take. Let's see, give an example of how you would test suspicious activity. So I'll give you an example of what I did. I'm as a consultant, they know me, right? I'm maybe out in the facility. But what I did one day is there was an open vat of product, and I just kind of was like standing around, kind of looking a little sus, as my 13-year-old daughter would put it. And I did have two people actually came up to me, and normally nobody talks to me when I'm out there, and they're like, do you need something? Can I help you? And one person's like eyeing me, so just trying to get in an area where there is open product, that there is that potential So, find someone that maybe shouldn't be in that area. Maybe it could even be like someone from the warehouse, right? Or, someone that isn't normally in that area. And what you're doing as the observer, right, or that person, they're reporting back. This is what happened. This is who reached out and said, hey, do you need help? Or, the vat was closed, and maybe there were other conditions. So document all of that. Okay. Let's see here. So yes, you're based in Canada and supplying to the U.S. So as part of the FSVP rules, you have to comply with preventive controls, although we have that reciprocal agreement. So in Canada, CFIA does not have a food defense plan requirement yet. So they have some stuff in place, but it's not at the level that it is here in the US for FDA. So yes, you would have to have a food defense IAVA rule compliant plan if you're supplying product to the US that's FDA. Great question. Okay, so I've been told by an auditor that you cannot use a real crisis as a test example. So I think perhaps in this exact example, sorry, let me see here. I couldn't see the full question. Let me undock it again. As a test example. Okay, sorry, it cuts off. Oh, here we go. Example of your plan. So that's actually not entirely true or incorrect. So yes, you can use a real crisis that happens, right? But you have to document it. Did it test your crisis plan? You need to complete that full scenario. And don't just stop there though, challenge a little bit more, right? Challenge, whether or not you have the right contact list. Did you, test it in other ways? Was product impacted? So absolutely, you can use that. It is just because it's a real life test doesn't make it any less effective unless you didn't complete all the activities as I was mentioning in order to be able to do that and document it to qualify as a meaningful test. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so I work for a very small company, only 15 total employees. Can we put the plans together with the team of the same? Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and many of the clients we work with, may have less than 15 even employees, and you guys all wear many hats, right? But sometimes that is why, like, I go into more smaller companies because they need that outside voice. They need someone else to kind of test and help them challenge their plans because they wear so many hats. You might not, be as open to what could or couldn't occur in your operation. So, sometimes having someone outside come in and look at your food defense and crisis management plans and tests can help challenge. But your own company, it's absolutely okay to have the same team. Just make sure everyone's knowledgeable on the difference between the two and why the outcomes and the mitigations are different. Okay, if we have a crisis management program in place, do we still need to create a business continuity plan? Another great auditing type question. It used to be that the GFSI schemes had business continuity in their clause requirements. Through the process of trying to make sure that everyone has essentially the similar programs that they're looking at, business continuity evolved into crisis management program. So yes, you can still have your business continuity plan, but it's not necessarily required that you have, for example, alternative place where you can produce product. But in the event of a crisis that it was catastrophic to your operation, it might be reasonable to say, yes, I'm going to have a mitigation strategy of what I would do to ensure that I was able to produce. So it's still a best practice, but we really want those crisis management programs to be product specific. From a safety standpoint, and focus on how it could impact not just the facility, but products that are stored, held, processed in your operation. Okay. Yes, I know there is revenue thresholds for this facility that must surpass. Although if you look at the compliance states, we're well past those revenue thresholds now. Even very small companies need to comply. The only way that you get out of not having a plan is putting yourself as requesting to be a qualified facility. That's also same with the PCQI. But in the main, even if we have a very small company, we still want to have that plan in place. Warehouses, for example, are actually not covered under the food defense plan. They're exempt because your product is fully enclosed, and FDA made a rationalization that it's not going to be an impact that's going to have a severe public health event for a product that is in a warehouse. Although many of our warehouses and storage facilities are still complying and putting food defense plans in place, irrespective of their regulatory status exemption. So quick question on that about the qualified individual for food defense, that they must be trained every 3 years. No, that the program, so the 3 years, what they're meaning there is that by our regulations, the program itself needs to be reevaluated. You need to go all the way back to your threat assessment, your vulnerability assessment. But for GFSI, we have to do that review annually. So the annual trumps the regulatory requirement of 3 years, but it doesn't mean that the qualified individual needs to be trained every 3 years. They need to be trained once, and they need to just be kept up on what the risks are for those 2 programs. And then, of course, annually, we also do need to do those refresher trainings, like you mentioned, the frontline workers, right? And of course, our program for new hire and the like. Okay, lots of questions here, but we're at the top of the hour. So let me just take a couple more, and then happy to follow up with additional questions after. Let's see here. What steps should you take if your test fails, right? So if your test fails, that's a great question, right? Bringing that team together, doing that evaluation to say, okay, why did it fail? What could we do to prevent failure? Do we need resources? Do we need to do something different? It's perfectly acceptable in your mock scenario, in your challenge, if the test fails. For example, that blue jug that I had put in the warehouse, for example, I didn't circle back around on that example. It sat there for 24 hours, guys. Nobody did anything with it. And the next day I came back and I was like, where is it? Oh crap, where did it go? And it's one of the new guys just said, oh yeah, I threw that away. He didn't see something, he saw something, but he didn't say anything. And so what we had to do is put better training in place, right? It was that, okay, we think we have good controls in place, but we really don't. And so that is why we challenge these programs. That is why we do the test and document our mitigation strategy. Then let some time pass, and then don't forget to go back and retest it, right? Make sure that your new programs in place have worked. And lastly, I'll just answer one more question because I knew this one was going to come up, which is what about that acts of violence, like a gunman coming into your operation? I know many sites have had that type of crisis scenario where they, are trying to prepare their site for it from, people's safety. But just remember, if you're doing that, have you considered what would happen, to the product? I hate to say this, but, having that bloodborne pathogen program, even if someone, gets injured, but don't just do that, right? Make sure you're also putting crisis challenge programs in place that look at, the higher severity prioritization items. And that's why I started this webinar with prioritize, right? Make sure you're focusing on those crises and the events and those significant vulnerabilities that your program said was high risk. Make sure those challenges are in place. So yes, you might have multiple approaches, multiple yearly tests that you're checking out different things. Whew. Well, thank you guys for joining and all those thought-provoking questions. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to all of them, but I will definitely try to answer those in that follow-up email to everyone. And if you need any of this training or other type of food safety training, please check out our SCS training website. We also just launched our 2024 training schedule with some brand new courses that are coming up, like FDA labeling and dietary supplements. So we're as well as some Spanish courses, which we are absolutely going to expand our Spanish offering. And thank you. And if you need to reach out to us, we will can be contacted here, and you can take a screenshot or you'll get the information in the end. And yes, and thank you guys all. There is a survey. We'd love for you guys to help us out with the survey, just to make sure that we have met your needs, and for any other topics that you guys would like us to cover. All right, thank you guys for attending, and we'll get this out